My daughter-in-law was smiling at me across the flickering candlelight, pushing a bowl of homemade sweet potato pie toward my place setting. It was my favorite dessert, a recipe passed down from my great-grandmother. But as she urged me to take the first bite, I realized something horrifying. That bowl was laced with enough blood pressure medication to cause heart failure. Not just in a 70-year-old man, but in a horse. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. Instead, I reached under the tablecloth, sent a quiet text, and prepared to put on the performance of a lifetime. My name is Cyrus Blackwood. I'm 70 years old, and for the last 40 years, I let the world believe I was just a retired HVAC contractor living on a modest pension. I drove a 10-year-old Ford pickup. I wore flannel shirts from Costco. I lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in a working-class neighborhood, the same home where I raised my son. What nobody knew, not even my own blood, was that those dirty years crawling through attics and fixing furnaces were just the beginning. I took every dollar of profit I made and bought land when the market crashed. I renovated rundown apartment buildings when everyone else ran away. Today, I own a commercial real estate portfolio worth over $50 million, but I kept it completely quiet. I wanted my son Tyson to build his own character, not live in the shadow of my checkbook. I thought I was teaching him values. Turns out, all I taught him was resentment. This nightmare started 3 hours earlier. It was Christmas Eve, and the air inside Tyson's over-leveraged suburban mansion was suffocating. The heat was turned up way too high, probably to make up for the drafty windows they couldn't afford to fix. My son sat at the head of the table, looking like a man shivering inside his own skin. At 32, he still had the soft eyes of the boy I used to take fishing, but now they were dull, darting nervously between me and his wife, Tiffany. She sat there in a dress that probably cost more than my first truck, her blonde hair styled to perfection, and her nails manicured into sharp red points. She always looked at me with that same expression, a mix of boredom and slight disgust, like I was a stain on her clean carpet. We had just finished opening gifts. I handed Tyson a small, heavy envelope containing a savings bond I had bought for him 20 years ago. It had finally matured into a solid amount. It wasn't flashy, but it was real money. Security. Before Tyson could even thank me, Tiffany snatched it from his hands. She tore it open, stared at the paper, and let out a sharp laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Seriously, Cyrus," she said, tossing it onto the table like junk mail. "A savings bond? What is this, 1950? We're drowning in credit card bills from the renovation, and you give us paper we have to take to a bank? We need cash." Or maybe that watch Tyson wanted. Something that actually shows you care about your son's standing. Tyson looked down at his plate. "Tiffany, it's a generous gift," he mumbled, his voice so quiet you could barely hear it. "Generous?" she scoffed, pouring herself more wine. "It's cheap. Just like that beat-up truck outside. Just like those boots you refuse to replace. Cyrus, you sit in a paid-off house on a lot that keeps going up in value. You could sell that place, move into a condo, and hand us the equity. But no, you'd rather hoard it. You're just selfish." I sat there feeling a familiar ache in my chest. It wasn't a medical issue. It was heartbreak. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to say, "My dad worked hard for that house. My dad put me through college. My dad is a good man." Tyson said nothing. He just swallowed his wine and avoided my eyes. That's when the dizziness hit. It came on fast and hard, a wave of nausea, making the room tilt. I had taken a few spoonfuls of the lobster bisque Tiffany served earlier. It had been overly salty and heavily spiced. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white against the cloth. "Are you okay, Dad?" Tyson asked, his voice shaking slightly. "I just need some water," I managed to say, pushing my chair back with a loud scrape against the floor. "Need to clear my head." "Sit down, Cyrus," Tiffany said, her tone shifting instantly from sharp to sweet. "I'll get it for you. Rest, you look awful." "No." I forced myself up, my legs feeling like lead. "I need to move around. I'll get it myself." I stumbled out of the dining room, leaning heavily against the wall. The hallway was as covered as Tiffany and Tyson on vacations I knew they couldn't afford. Cabo, Paris, Aspen. Not a single photo of me or of my late wife, Beatrice. It was a shrine to their own vanity. I headed toward the kitchen to get a glass of cold water. The door was cracked open. As I got closer, I heard the clinking of ceramic and hushed, panicked whispers. I stopped. Decades on construction sites had taught me how to move quietly when I needed to. I pressed my back against the wall and looked through the gap in the door hinge. What I saw made my blood run cold. Tiffany was standing at the marble island, with a large bowl of sweet potato pie filling in front of her. Beside it was a mortar and pestle, along with a few scattered blue pills. I recognized them immediately. They were my medication. High-dose beta blockers I kept in my coat pocket for my irregular heart rhythm. She was grinding them into a fine blue powder. "How many did you use?" Tyson asked in a low voice. He was by the fridge, holding his phone, his face pale and sweating. "All of them," Tiffany hissed, dumping the powder into the orange mixture. She grabbed a spoon and began stirring vigorously until the blue disappeared into the spices and puree. "Is that too much?" Tyson asked, frantically scrolling on his screen. "Online it says an overdose can cause heart failure within an hour. What if it happens too fast? What if the paramedics notice something?" "Stop being weak," she snapped. "He's old. He has a heart condition. If his heart fails after a heavy holiday meal, nobody is going to question it. It happens all the time. We call for help, we cry, and we tell them he was complaining of chest pain all night. It's foolproof. But this is murder," Tyson's voice cracked. "He's my dad." "He's an obstacle," she said, slamming the spoon on the counter. She turned to face him, her eyes wide. "Do you want to lose this house? Do you want those people coming back for your gambling debts? We need his life insurance, and we need the equity from his home. We need it now, not in 10 years. This is a mercy, Tyson. We're putting him out of his misery and saving ourselves." Tyson put his phone down. He looked at the floor, then back at the pie. "Fine," he whispered. "Fine. Just make sure he eats it all." I felt stomach acid rise in my throat. My own son. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The boy I held when he cried over his first heartbreak. Wasn't just letting this happen. He was checking timelines. He was a partner in this. The dizziness I felt earlier cleared up, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Adrenaline surged through me. I realized that soup had probably just been a test run. The pie was the main event. I backed away from the door, moving quietly across the rug. I slipped into the living room and sat in the armchair, furthest from the kitchen. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a deep, profound rage that felt like a burning coal in my gut. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't call the authorities right away. I had to be smarter than that. If I made a scene now, they'd claim I was confused or losing my mind. They would hide the pills, and it would be my word against theirs. I needed undeniable proof. I needed a witness. I opened my messages and typed out 2 texts. The first was to emergency services. I kept it brief. Suspected poisoning in progress. 70-year-old male. Address is 422 Oak Creek Lane. Suspects are preparing a lethal dose in food. Send help, but approach quietly. The second text went to Reggie King. Reggie wasn't just my lawyer. He was a brother to me, someone I served with 50 years ago. He was the only person who knew the true scale of my assets, and the only person I trusted with my life. Code Omega, I typed. Initiate the plan. They crossed the line. Bring the team to the hospital. I hit send, then deleted both messages from my chat history. I slid the phone back into my pocket just as the kitchen door pushed open. Tiffany walked out, holding the bowl of pie, a smile on her face that could charm a snake. Tyson followed behind her, carrying dessert plates, looking like he was marching to a gallows. "There you are, Dad," Tiffany said brightly. "I brought you water. But I thought we should go straight to dessert. It's your favorite." She placed the bowl on the coffee table in front of me. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg drifted up, masking the smell of betrayal. "Eat up, Cyrus," she said. "It's delicious." I looked at the bowl, then up at my son. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to eat it, but I needed them to believe. Their plan was working long enough to tie the knot on their own mistakes. I clutched my chest, gasped for air, and prepared to fall. Tiffany set the ceramic bowl on the placemat with a sharp clink that sounded incredibly loud in the quiet room. She smoothed her dress and stepped back, folding her hands under her chin in a posture of exaggerated anticipation. The heat rising from the bowl carried the rich, earthy scent of sweet potatoes, cinnamon, and nutmeg. Tonight, though, it smelled like a chemical fire, covered in sugar. I looked down at the orange mixture. It appeared perfectly smooth, completely harmless. There were no visible blue specks. She had been thorough with that mortar and pestle. "Go ahead, Cyrus," Tiffany urged, her voice tight with forced cheerfulness. "It's best while it's hot. I know how much you love it." I looked up at her. Her eyes were wide, fixed on me with a predator's focus. She barely blinked. Behind her, Tyson stood near the archway leading to the kitchen, rubbing his hands together. He looked terrified. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the chill in the room. He couldn't even look at the bowl. He kept staring at his shoes, shifting his weight back and forth. I picked up my spoon. The silver felt cold and heavy in my hand. I dipped it into the mixture and stirred slowly. It was thick. I scooped up a full bite and let the steam rise toward my face. I watched them watching me. Tiffany leaned forward slightly, holding her breath. Tyson finally raised his head, his eyes locked on the spoon, hovering inches from my lips. I could see the fear on his face. Not the fear of losing his father, but the fear of getting caught. He was weak. He had always been weak. I had tried to make him strong, taking him to job sites and teaching him how to handle business, but he always preferred the easy way out. And now, the easy way out was this. "Is something wrong, Dad?" Tyson asked, his voice cracking. "You're just staring at it." "Just taking in the smell," I said. My voice remained steady despite the anger burning inside me. "Smells different this year." "Did you change the recipe, Tiffany?" She flinched, her head making a tiny jerk. "Just a little extra clove," she said quickly. And maybe a secret ingredient. You know I like to experiment. Please, try it. I brought the spoon closer to my mouth. I could see the muscles in her neck tighten. She was practically trembling, waiting for me to swallow it. I held the spoon there for 5 seconds, then 10, letting the silence stretch out until it felt razor. Then, I dropped the spoon. It hit the rim of the bowl with a loud clatter, splashing a small blob of orange onto the white tablecloth. I let out a sharp, shallow gasp. My hand flew to my chest, gripping the fabric of my flannel shirt. I squeezed my eyes shut and groaned in pain. "Cyrus!" Tiffany yelled, though she didn't step toward me. I shuddered in my chair and threw my head back. With my other hand, I knocked over the water glass, sending ice and water cascading across the table. I let my body go limp, sliding sideways until I hit the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. "Dad!" Tyson shouted. I lay on the floor, my face pressed against the cool wood. My breathing was rapid and loud. I had to sell this. I needed them to believe I was going down, but I also needed to see what they would do next. I heard Tyson rush toward me, his footsteps heavy and panicked. He knelt beside me. "Dad? Dad? Can you hear me?" "Don't touch him," Tiffany hissed, her voice right above me. She must have walked over. "What's happening?" Tyson's panic was rising. "He didn't even eat the pie." "Look at the bowl, Tiffany. It's full." He didn't take a single bite. I lay there, letting out a wheezing breath, my body twitching occasionally. This was the moment of truth. A son who loved his father would call for an ambulance. A daughter-in-law who cared would check for a pulse. They did neither. "He didn't eat it," Tiffany whispered, her voice shaking with a different kind of fear. "If he passes away from a natural heart attack right now, fine. We get lucky. But what if he doesn't? What if medics arrive and find those pills in the pie? We have to dispose of it," Tyson said, his voice frantic. "Flush it down the drain." "No, you idiot," Tiffany snapped. "If we dump it now and he survives, he'll wonder why we threw his dinner away. We have to hide it. Put it in the fridge." "No, put it in the trash, under the other trash." Quickly, I heard the bowl being grabbed off the table with a clatter, followed by footsteps hurrying back into the kitchen. They were scrambling, terrified, not because I was in pain on their floor, but because their weapon was still sitting right there out in the open. "Call 911, Tyson," Tiffany called out from the kitchen. "You have to call now so it doesn't look suspicious. Tell them he collapsed. Tell them it's his heart." I heard Tyson fumbling with his phone, his voice shaking as he spoke to the dispatcher. I let out another long, raspy groan and arched my back. I'm calling," Tyson stammered. "Yes, emergency services?" "It's my dad. He collapsed. I think it's a heart attack. He's shaking. Please hurry. 422 Oak Creek Lane." I lay there listening to my son play his role. He sounded convincing, like a grieving, panicked son. It crushed the last bit of hope I had left in my heart. He was truly lost. The boy I raised was gone, replaced by a stranger who viewed my life as a financial transaction. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. I kept up the act, keeping my breathing shallow and my body limp. Tiffany came back into the room, pacing back and forth. "Why aren't they here yet?" she muttered. "If he wakes up, Tyson, if he wakes up and talks, we're done. He was acting strange before dinner. Do you think he knows?" "He couldn't know," Tyson whispered. "How could he? He's just old, his heart is giving out. It's a coincidence. A lucky coincidence." Lucky. They called my death lucky. Then, sirens cut through the night air. growing louder as red and blue lights flashed against my closed eyelids. Help had arrived. Heavy boots sounded on the porch, followed by urgent knocks on the front door. "In here!" Tiffany cried out, her tone instantly shifting to hysterical grief. "Please help him! He just collapsed!" The front door burst open. I heard the commotion of people rushing in, radio chatter, and the smell of rain mixing with the indoor air. "Sir, can you hear me?" a deep voice asked. Hands pressed against me, checking my pulse and lifting my eyelids. I let my eyes open just a crack. I saw a blur of uniforms, with Tyson and Tiffany standing in the background, holding each other as tears ran down Tiffany's cheeks. The face hovering directly over me, though, was the one I was looking for. It was a large man with a scar above his left eyebrow. He wore a standard paramedic uniform, but pinned subtly to his collar was a small gold lion, the crest of Reggie's private security firm. It was his team. He leaned in close, pretending to check my breathing, his lips barely moving. "Code Omega," he whispered so quietly only I could hear. "Reggie sent me. You're safe, Mr. Blackwood." I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I was holding, giving a nod so slight it was practically invisible. "Weak pulse irregular," the medic called out loudly, playing his part perfectly. "We need to move him now. Get the gurney." The team moved with military precision. I was lifted onto the stretcher and strapped in across my chest. "What's happening? Is he going to make it?" Tyson asked, stepping forward. "We're taking him to St. Jude's," the medic said firmly, blocking Tyson's path with his shoulder. "You can follow in your car, but we need to stabilize him on the way. Don't slow us down." "Wait," Tiffany called out. "I need to get his insurance card. I need to—" "We have everything we need on file," the medic interrupted. "We're moving." They rolled me out into the cool night air. As they lifted the gurney into the back of the ambulance, I caught one last glance of my son and his wife standing in the doorway of the expensive house I had paid for. They looked small and frightened. For the first time, all evening, they looked like they realized they were losing control. The doors slammed shut, sealing me inside with the team. The siren blared, and the vehicle surged forward. The medic looked down at me and pulled the oxygen mask slightly away from my face. "You can relax now, sir," he said. While officers secured the scene, we secured samples from the kitchen. My partner retrieved the bowl from the trash. "We have the evidence." I closed my eyes, finally letting a tear slip down my cheek. I was alive and safe, but as the ambulance navigated the dark streets, I knew the real work was just beginning. I had survived the attempt on my life. Now, it was time to deal with the fallout. The hospital room smelled of bleach and cold air, a sterile scent that couldn't cover the tension in the room. I lay motionless on the narrow bed, my eyes closed and my breathing shallow. The leads from the heart monitor tugged gently at my chest, the machine emitting a steady, rhythmic beep that set the pace for my act. Reggie had arranged everything seamlessly. The attending physician was on his payroll, a man who knew how to keep quiet and manage a delicate situation. I was supposed to be unresponsive, a man hovering on the edge after a major cardiac event. To any observer, I was defenseless, but to the hidden camera concealed inside the smoke detector above the bed, I was bait. The heavy hospital door creaked open. I didn't flinch. I heard the sharp click of high heels on the tile floor. Tiffany, followed by the squeak of rubber soles. Tyson. At first, they said nothing. They didn't rush to my bedside, hold my hand, or ask the nurse if I was going to pull through. The silence was heavy, broken only by the rustle of clothing. "Check the door," Tiffany whispered, her voice sharp and impatient. "Make sure no one is coming." "Clear," Tyson muttered. I felt a presence looming over me, cold and predatory. I felt hands fumbling with my clothing, not checking for a fever, but patting down the pockets of my felt coat hanging on the back of the bedside chair. I heard the scratch of Velcro as my wallet was yanked open. $40, Tiffany hissed, her tone dripping with contempt. $40. And a membership card from 2004. Jesus, Tyson, your father lives like a pauper. Where is the rest of it? Where are the bank cards? He keeps his cash in a coffee can under the sink, Tyson whispered back. He never trusted banks for his daily expenses. Pathetic, she spat. I heard my leather wallet drop onto the nightstand. Well, it doesn't matter. That cash is nothing compared to the real prize. Get the papers out. We need to get this done before he wakes up or dies. I lay there, keeping my heart rate steady through pure willpower, listening to the crisp rustle of paper being unfolded. It sounded like a thick official document. This is it, Tyson said, his voice trembling slightly. Power of attorney. The template I downloaded. This gives us control over everything. Medical decisions, real estate, bank accounts. If we get this executed, we can liquidate his assets before probate court even sees a death certificate. But he can't sign it, Tiffany snapped. Look at him. He's completely out. That's why we brought the ink pad, Tyson said. Section 4, paragraph 3. If the principal is physically incapacitated, a mark or thumbprint is valid as long as it's witnessed. And who witnesses it? Tiffany asked. I do, Tyson said. And you. We'll just say he woke up for a second, was coherent enough to nod, and we helped guide his hand. Who's going to argue with a grieving son and daughter-in-law? The logic was chillingly calculated and completely illegal. I felt the mattress sink as Tiffany sat on the edge of the bed. I focused on keeping my eyelids still, fighting the urge to clench my jaw. Give me the pad, she commanded. I felt her hand grab my right wrist. Her skin was cold and clammy. She lifted my arm. It was dead weight, heavy and limp, just as I intended. She moved my hand toward the small plastic container she had placed on the nightstand. Pry his hand open, she ordered Tyson. He's making a fist. I wasn't trying to make a fist. It was just the natural, resting position of a hand that had held hammers and wrenches for 50 years. My joints were stiff with arthritis. Something Tyson would have known if he had ever bothered to ask how I was doing. Tyson grabbed my fingers and forced them apart. His touch wasn't gentle. He pulled back my index finger and thumb, forcing my hand flat. Hold him still, Tiffany hissed. She grabbed my thumb, twisting it back to force the pad of my thumb against the inked sponge. I felt the wet, cold touch of the ink. Press down hard, she said. We need a clean print. She dug her nails into the back of my hand, using her weight to press my thumb firm into the pad. The pain was sharp and sudden as she bent my thumb back far enough to strain the tendon. It took every ounce of discipline I had learned decades ago not to flinch or pull away. I remained completely still. Okay, bring the paper over, she said. I felt the document brush against my arm. She lifted my ink-stained thumb and pressed it heavily onto the paper, rolling it side to side to ensure a solid print on the page. One more time, she said, just to be safe. She repeated the process on the second page, even rougher this time, twisting my wrist at an awkward angle until I heard a pop in the joint. A hot, shooting pain traveled up my arm, and a low, involuntary groan escaped my throat, a sound easily mistaken for a dying man's murmur. "He made a noise, Tyson," said, panic creeping into his voice. "Hurry up!" "I am," she snapped. "There, it's done." She dropped my hand, and it fell limp onto the bedsheet, throbbing with pain. I could feel the sticky ink drying on my skin, a physical mark of what they had just done. "Wipe it off," Tyson said. "If the nurse sees ink, she'll know." "Use a wipe," Tiffany replied. She scrubbed my thumb with a rough, alcohol-soaked cloth, completely indifferent to whether it hurt. She kept rubbing until my skin was raw and red, erasing the physical evidence from my body. But the evidence on that paper was permanent, and the recording from the hidden camera capturing their every move was eternal. I lay there listening to them stuff the documents back into a folder. They stood at the foot of the bed, looking at me. To them, I was no longer a human being. I was a signature, a deal that had just been closed. "So, what's the plan now?" Tyson asked, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "We wait," Tiffany said, her voice chillingly calm. "We wait for the doctor to come back. We tell him we have power of attorney, and we want to discuss end-of-life care." "End-of-life care?" Tyson repeated. "You mean pulling the plug?" "He's in pain, Tyson," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Look at him. He's basically gone already. Why draw it out? We show them the papers, take control, make the merciful decision to let him go, and then we put the house on the market. How much do you think we can get for it?" Tyson asked. "I checked recent sales in the area," Tiffany replied. "The neighborhood is gentrifying fast, and developers are paying cash for these older lots. The house itself is trash. It smells like an old man and sawdust, but that corner double lot is worth a fortune. We can easily get $2 million, maybe 2.5 if we trigger a bidding war." $2 million, Tyson gasped. "That pays off everything. That pays off Viper Capital and leaves enough for a condo in Buckhead." "Exactly," Tiffany said. $2 million, Tyson. All we have to do is wait for his heart to stop. Honestly, dying now is doing us a favor. If he hangs on for a few more years, he'll drain all the equity in medical bills. This is the best outcome." I listened as they carved up my life. They talked about my truck as junk metal and my tools as trash to be cleared out. The home where I had rocked Tyson to sleep as a baby was reduced to a patch of dirt waiting for a bulldozer. They didn't know about the commercial properties. They didn't know about the investment accounts. They didn't know that the very house they were so eager to sell had already been placed into an irrevocable trust, set to be donated to a charity that builds schools in developing countries. They knew nothing, especially that the man lying in this bed, the man they planned to quietly eliminate for a quick payout, was fully conscious. I felt a chill rise in my chest, completely unrelated to the air conditioning. It was the death of whatever paternal affection I still held for Tyson. He stood there, nodding along while his wife planned my end, salivating over the price tag on my grave. "All right," Tiffany said, clapping her hands softly. "Let's find the doctor and get things moving. Put on your sad face, honey. Showtime." They walked out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the dots. $2 million. That was my price tag. That was what my life was worth to them. I slowly raised my right hand. My thumb was red and swollen, with traces of black ink still trapped in the ridges of my skin. I looked directly at the hidden camera in the smoke detector and let my lips curl into a cold smile that would have terrified them if they had seen it. They wanted a quick resolution, a massive payout. I was going to give them a payout, all right. Not in dollars, but in pure misery. I reached out and pressed the nurse call button 3 times. That was the signal for Reggie. It was time to wake up. It was time to return from the brink and show these kids what a real ghost looks like. They wanted the house. They wanted the money. They were going to lose everything, and I was going to enjoy watching it burn. 3 days later, I was wheeled out of St. Jude Medical Center looking like a walking corpse. Reggie had done an extraordinary job with the paperwork and medical cover story. According to my records, I had suffered a severe ischemic stroke that left me paralyzed on one side and unable to speak. I sat slumped in the wheelchair, my head hanging heavy to the left, a carefully managed trickle of saliva running down my chin. My eyes were dull and unfocused, seeing nothing, yet taking in everything. Tyson stood at the front desk, signing the final discharge papers. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. But there was a gleam of triumph in his expression that made my stomach turn. He had the power of attorney. He had the discharge papers. Now he had my body. He wheeled me out to the curb where his rented BMW was idling. He hadn't driven my truck. He grunted as he roughly shoved me into the passenger seat, treating me like a bag of mulch rather than his father, not even bothering to fasten my seatbelt properly. As we drove, I watched familiar streets pass by the window. I assumed he would turn left on Oak Creek Lane, heading to my house, my sanctuary, where my things were. Instead, he turned right toward the highway, heading for the suburbs. We were going to his house. He wasn't taking me home to recover. He was taking me to a cell. When we pulled into his driveway, Tiffany was waiting on the porch. She wasn't happy to see me. Her disgust was plain as she crossed her arms while Tyson hauled me out of the car. He practically carried me to the front door, breathing heavily with the effort. I made myself as heavy as possible, letting my limbs hang limp. "Don't bring him in here," Tiffany snapped, blocking the entrance. "I just had the carpets cleaned, Tyson. If he soils them, I'll kill you. He smells like a hospital and an old man." "Where am I supposed to put him?" Tyson asked, struggling to keep me upright. "The guest room is set up for your mother's visit." "Put him downstairs in the basement," she said. "It's unfinished, Tiff. It's freezing down there, maybe 50 degrees. Put a space heater next to him." "Put a heater next to him," she waved her hand dismissively. "He's paralyzed, Tyson. He won't know the difference. Besides, cleaning concrete is a lot easier than hardwood. Just get him out of my sight." Tyson sighed, but he didn't argue. He dragged me through the kitchen, past the warm oven and the smell of roasting chicken, opening the narrow door to the basement. A blast of cold, damp air hit my face, smelling of wet earth, rotting cardboard, and neglect. The wooden stairs were steep. He half carried, half slid me down into the darkness, dumping me onto a stained mattress in the corner that looked like it had been salvaged from the curb. There were no windows, just bare, sweating cinder block walls. In the corner, a sump pump hummed intermittently, like a mechanical heartbeat in the dark. He threw a thin, scratchy wool blanket over me that reeked of mothballs and dog hair. "Stay here, Dad," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. "I'll bring you something to eat later." He turned, hurried up the stairs, and slammed the door shut. The lock clicked into place. I was left alone in the dark while above my head I could hear the muffled sounds of their lives. The murmur of the TV, the clinking of glasses, laughter. They were celebrating my imprisonment in the dungeon of the house I had helped pay for. I waited until I was sure they had settled in for the night, staying still until the floorboards stopped creaking above and the house grew quiet. Slowly, I sat up. I wiped the fake drool from my chin, stretched my neck, and rolled my shoulders to ease the stiffness from playing a stroke victim for hours. The cold was biting, penetrating the thin hospital gown and flannel shirt Tyson had hastily dressed me in. I reached into a hidden pocket, sewn into the inner layer of my trousers. A modification I had made years ago to carry cash on construction sites. I pulled out a small black device no larger than a pack of gum, a high-fidelity voice recorder capable of picking up whispers across a room. I hit record and placed it on a crate next to the mattress, hiding it under a stack of old newspapers. Then I pulled out my phone, shielding the screen glow with the blanket. I had 1 bar of signal. Enough. I opened a secure messaging app and sent a text to Reggie. The Eagle has landed. Proceeding to phase humane. Freeze their assets tomorrow morning. I want their cards declined the moment they wake up. I tucked the phone away and lay back down on the dirty mattress, staring up at the exposed floor joists. I could see the plumbing and wiring, the guts of the house. I knew exactly how this place was built because I had reviewed the inspection report when Tyson bought it. I knew where the weak spots were, where the leaks would start. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I listened. I recorded. I planned. They thought they had buried me in the dark. They didn't realize they had just planted a seed, and tomorrow the roots would begin to strangle them. The rumble of the garage door opening and the fade of the BMW engine down the street were my cues. I lay motionless for 3 full minutes, counting the seconds in my head, just like I used to time concrete setting. Once I was sure they were gone, I sat up. My back protested against the cold floor, but I ignored it. The frail stroke victim vanished, replaced by Cyrus Blackwood, master contractor. I walked to the basement stairs, my steps silent and steady. The door at the top was locked. A simple privacy knob, meant mostly to keep toddlers out. Tyson had never been good with his hands. He didn't understand that a lock is only as strong as the frame it sits in. In a box of discarded Christmas decorations in the corner, I found a piece of stiff wire. Bending the end into a small hook, I walked up the stairs and knelt by the keyhole. It took less than 10 seconds. I felt the tumblers move, the spring compress, and with a soft click, the knob turned. I pushed the door open and stepped into the kitchen. The house was quiet. I moved quickly, avoiding the squeaky floorboards I had noted earlier. My target was the home office at the end of the hall. The door was solid oak, a decent finish hiding cheap particle board, and it too was locked. I pulled a thin plastic card from my hidden pocket, slid it between the door and the frame to find the latch, applied pressure, angled the card, and pushed. The door popped open. I was in. I sat in Tyson's oversized leather executive chair, which creaked under my weight. The desk was a disaster zone, cluttered with unopened mail and crumpled papers, the workspace of a drowning man. I started with the stack of mail on the left, overdue notices, final demands, collection letters. Shoving those aside, I found a manila envelope under a pile of car magazines and opened it. Inside was a termination letter from the bank, where Tyson claimed to be a vice president, dated 2 years ago. He hadn't been laid off. He had been fired for gross negligence and failure to follow compliance protocols. 2 years. He had been waking up every morning, putting on a suit, leaving the house, and pretending to go to work for 2 whole years. I felt a pang of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the next document I found. It was an American Express Platinum statement with a staggering balance of $80,000. I found another for a Visa card at $50,000. In total, I uncovered 6 statements from different credit card companies with total debt pushing $300,000. Scrolling through the transactions, it read like a catalog of narcissism. $3,000 for a Louis Vuitton bag, $500 for dinner at Nobu, weekend trips to Caribbean resorts, spa treatments, luxury car leases. They were living like royalty on borrowed money. They weren't just broke. They were penniless and insolvent, sustaining the charade by bleeding me dry. I pulled open the bottom drawer of the desk. It was locked, but the mechanism was cheap zinc. Bracing my foot against the desk leg, I gave the drawer a sharp yank. The wood splintered and the drawer slid out. Inside was a single red folder. The name on the tab sent a jolt of recognition through me. Viper Capital. I knew that name all too well. Opening the folder, my breath caught in my throat. It was a high-interest short-term loan agreement. A hard money bridge loan for $50,000 in cash, carrying criminal, weekly compounding interest and aggressive collection terms. It was the kind of loan you took when banks threw you out the door. But it was the collateral section that turned my vision a furious red. Listed right there in black and white was the address. 422 Oak Creek Lane, my house, my paid-off home. At the bottom of the page was a signature, Cyrus Blackwood. It was a forgery, a shaky, pathetic attempt to copy the signature I used to sign on Tyson's report cards and birthday checks. They had stolen my identity. They had mortgaged the roof over my head to a predatory lender just to fund their vanity, putting my name on a contract that could leave me homeless. I ran my fingers over the ink of the forged signature. It was recent, done just weeks ago. That was why they needed me dead. The first payment was likely due soon, and without my life insurance, they couldn't make it. They couldn't make it. I closed the folder, my hands steady now as my anger crystallized into something cold and hard. They had made a deal with the devil. They just didn't realize the devil was standing right in their office. I pulled my phone from my pocket the moment the office door clicked shut behind me. My hands were steady, but my heart was pounding like a sledgehammer against steel. I dialed Reggie, and he picked up on the first ring, his voice crisp and professional. "Status?" he asked. "Viper Capital?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "They owe Viper 50 grand, and they forged my signature to use my house as collateral on a high-interest note." There was a pause on the line, followed by a low, dry chuckle that sounded like dry leaves rubbing together. "Reggie, what's so funny?" I asked, annoyed. "Cyrus," he said, "you really never read the quarterly reports for the multi-risk fund, do you?" "I pay you to read them," I snapped. "Viper Capital is a shell company owned by Blackwood Holdings," Reggie explained. "We bought their debt portfolio 6 months ago as distressed assets. That's your money, Cyrus. You're lending to yourself." The irony hit me like a physical blow. I almost laughed out loud. My son was stealing from me to pay off a loan shark, and the loan shark was actually me. I was both the predator and the prey. "So that debt belongs to me?" I asked to confirm. "The paper is yours, and so are the collectors," Reggie confirmed. "Good," I said, feeling a cold smile pull at my face. "Take off the leash. I want the collection team to call Tyson. Use that terrifying voice. Tell him the note is due, and give him 24 hours to pay the full $50,000, or they seize the asset." "And Reggie?" "Yeah, boss." "Tell him his physical safety isn't guaranteed." "That's cold. Cyrus, Reggie noted. He tried to poison me with sweet potato pie, Reggie, I said. Cold is just getting started. I made it back to the basement, minutes before the rumble of the garage door signaled their return. Settling onto the mattress, I arranged my limbs into the familiar, broken posture of a stroke victim, letting my mouth slacken and staring blankly at the damp cinder block wall. Above me, I heard Tyson's heavy footsteps and the sharp click of Tiffany's heels. They were arguing before they even fully made it inside. "We have to sell the jewelry," Tyson said, his voice high and tight. "It's the only way." "We are not selling my jewelry," Tiffany yelled. "That's my property." Then a phone rang, not the landline, but Tyson's mobile. The sound cut through their argument like a knife. The silence that followed was heavy. "Hello," Tyson answered, his voice small and trembling. I listened, imagining the color draining from his face. I could picture the voice on the other end. Marcus, Reggie's head of security, whose voice sounded like gravel being ground in a blender. "What do you mean, immediately?" Tyson squeaked. "The contract said, no, please, I need more time. My father, he listened for a moment, then let out a gasp of pure terror. "Tonight? I can't get 50,000 tonight. Please, we have a house. It's worth 2 million. We just need to liquidate." He was cut off as the call ended. I heard the sound of the phone dropping onto the granite countertop. "They want the money," Tyson whispered, his voice carrying through the thin floor, laced with dread. "Viper. They said the signature looks suspicious and that they're auditing the collateral. They want cash, Tiffany. Tonight. Or they send a team." "A team?" Tiffany's voice rose an octave. "Enforcers," Tyson said. "They said safety isn't guaranteed. Oh God, they know it's forged. If they find out the house isn't legally mine yet, they're going to kill us. We're dead. We're completely dead." "Shut up," Tiffany shouted. "Stop panicking. We need money." "Where do we get it?" "We don't have a dime," Tyson shouted back. "This is your fault. You insisted on the Mercedes. You insisted on the renovation. You bled me dry." "My fault?" Tiffany screamed. "You're the one who lost your job 2 years ago and was too cowardly to tell anyone. You're the one who sat in Starbucks playing games while pretending to be a banker. I'm the one trying to maintain appearances. Appearances don't pay off loan sharks." Heavy footsteps echoed as the basement door was thrown open. Light flooded down the stairs, blinding me. Tyson stomped down the wooden steps, his face red, sweating profusely, eyes wild. Tiffany followed him, looking like a cornered rat. They stood over me. I didn't move. I didn't blink. "Look at him," Tyson spat, kicking the mattress near my leg. "Lying there, completely useless. Millions in equity sitting in that house, and he's just taking up space. He's the reason we're in this mess," Tiffany hissed. She bent down, her face inches from mine, and I could smell the wine on her breath, along with the sharp, metallic tang of fear. "If you had just died," she whispered, her voice full of venom. "If you had just done the decent thing and passed away in that hospital bed, we'd be rich right now. We'd be safe." She slapped my cheek, not hard enough to leave a mark, but sharp enough to sting. It was a gesture of total disrespect. "Do something," she screamed at my unfeeling face. "Pass away! Pass away so we can sell your house!" Tyson grabbed her arm. "Stop. He doesn't understand. He's a vegetable. He's a stubborn old mule," she said, straightening up. "He's going to get us killed." "Maybe," Tyson said, looking down at me with a dark, desperate glint in his eyes that I had never seen before. "Maybe he can still help us, just not the way he intended." "What do you mean?" Tiffany asked. If Viper wants money, Tyson muttered, staring at my chest, maybe we can offer them something valuable. Or maybe we just need him gone so we can file the insurance claim faster. No more waiting around. We need to speed up the timeline. They looked at each other, the energy in the room shifting from panic to grim resolve. They turned and walked up the stairs, locking the door behind them. I lay in the dark, my cheek still stinging from her slap. They thought they were trapped, unaware that they were locked in a cage with the keeper, and I had just decided it was feeding time. The air in the basement grew thick, heavy, with an overwhelming sense of desperation. Tyson and Tiffany returned, pacing the small concrete space like trapped animals, their shadows dancing wildly against the cinder blocks under the single flickering bulb. The threat from the collection agency had broken something vital in them, stripping away any layer of civilization to leave raw, naked fear. Tyson was muttering to himself, biting his nails until they bled. 50 grand. We need 50 grand before sunrise, or they send people. We're dead, Tiffany. We're dead. Tiffany stopped pacing and stood over me, her silhouette looming large. She stared down at my motionless body with a cold, detached evaluation that was far scarier than her anger had been. She wasn't mad anymore. She was calculating, assessing me not as a father-in-law, but as a collection of assets. We're not going to end up dead, Tyson, she said, her voice flat. We just need to get creative. We have an untapped resource right here. Tyson looked at her, confused. What do you mean? The house. We can't sell it without his signature, and with Viper watching us, forging it now is too slow. Not the house, you idiot, she snapped. Him, this physical body. Tyson recoiled as if struck. What are you talking about? Tiffany crouched down, her face inches from mine. I could smell sour wine and the metallic tang of her fear. I heard a story, she whispered, her eyes scanning over me. A contact from my medical school days knew someone who paid top dollar for usable organs in Mexico. Kidneys, liver, corneas, even skin grafts. He's old, but he's healthy. His heart is weak, sure, but the rest of him is worth money. Tyson gagged. You want to chop him up? You want to sell my father for parts? Are you crazy, Tiff? That's monster talk. Tiffany stood up and slapped him across the face, the sound echoing off the concrete. Tyson stumbled back, clutching his cheek. Snap out of it, she screamed. Someone is coming to break our legs and burn this house down. You think they care about ethics? You think they care about your ridiculous father-son bond? We are talking about survival, Tyson. It's us or him. And look at him, she kicked the mattress by my head. He's a vegetable. He's going to pass us away anyway. We're just using what's left. We drive him across the border tonight. I make a call. We hand him over, and we walk away with $50,000 in cash. The debt is clear, we're free, and nobody ever knows. We say he wandered off, that the stroke made him confused, and he got lost in the woods. It happens all the time. Tyson looked at her, then down at me. I saw the struggle in his eyes, the last remaining fragment of his conscience battling his cowardice. He looked at my dull face, my slack jaw, my lifeless limbs, then at his wife, the woman who controlled his every breath. Finally, he looked toward the door, where imaginary enforcers were waiting. His shoulders slumped. How do we get him there? He asked softly, his voice broken. We put him in the trunk, Tiffany said, a cruel smile spreading across her face, like luggage. I lay there and felt the last tether of family connection snap. Not with a bang, but with a silent, mournful sigh. They weren't just greedy or entitled. They were predators. They had crossed the line from ungrateful children to monsters. The sweet potato pie had been an attempt at a clean, quiet murders. A merciful end in their twisted minds. But this was butchery, a desecration. They planned to hollow me out like a pumpkin and sell the seeds. Right then, I realized my original plan, simply scaring them and teaching them a lesson about money and gratitude, was nowhere near enough. You don't teach a rabid dog a lesson, you put it down. This wasn't a game of chess anymore. This was absolute, total war. Feeling the cold concrete beneath my back, I made a silent vow to the son I had once loved. You want to sell me for parts, Tyson? You want to trade my life for your freedom? I am going to strip you of everything. I will take your freedom, your future, and your name. You'll wish those enforcers had found you first. You'll wish you had never opened that basement door. I closed my eyes and slowed my breathing, waiting for them to leave and prepare. They thought I was helpless cargo, unaware that I was a bomb whose countdown had just hit 0. The transition from the basement to the main floor was jarring, not because of the temperature, but because of the noise. The entire house was vibrating with heavy bass, loud music that didn't belong in a quiet residential neighborhood. And the air was thick with cheap cologne and desperation. An hour ago, Tyson and Tiffany had dragged me up the stairs. They had stripped off my hospital gown and forced my stiff limbs into an old suit of mine, retrieved from the back of a closet. The suit was moth-eaten, smelling of cedar and forgotten years, but it was a necessary prop for their charade. They propped me up in a wheelchair, rented or stolen from somewhere, parking me in the corner of the living room, like a piece of strange, avant-garde furniture. I sat there, with my head tilted to the side and eyes half-lidded, watching the vulture feast they had invited into my home. These weren't friends or neighbors, bringing casseroles and condolences. They were bloodthirsty sharks. For my decades in business, I recognized the types immediately: hard money lenders looking for a quick flip, unlicensed real estate flippers who preyed on distress, pawn shop owners who never asked for receipts. Tyson and Tiffany were holding a fire sale, and I was the inventory. Desperate to pull together $50,000 for Viper Capital before sunrise, they were willing to sell anything not nailed down, including the deed to my home, which was sitting on the coffee table, surrounded by empty beer bottles and half-eaten appetizers. I watched Tyson work the room, his shirt soaked with sweat, his eyes darting nervously toward the front door every few minutes, as if expecting enforcers to burst through. He was trying to sell my tools, my truck, even the copper wiring out of the walls, to a man with a gold tooth and a snakeskin jacket. $5,000 for the truck and tools, the man said, flicking ash onto the carpet with a chuckle. $5,000? Tyson squeaked. The truck alone is worth 20. Not without a clear title and not for immediate cash, the man sneered. You want paper tonight, or do you want to haggle? Tyson took the cash. My heart bled, but I didn't move a muscle. The real horror, though, came from Tiffany, holding a glass poured far too full. With wine, she stood by the fireplace barking orders in an absurdly short dress. She was introducing me to people not as her father-in-law, but as an asset. This is the goose that laid the golden egg, she slurred, pointing her wineglass at me. Doctor says he could go any minute. Stroke fried his brain completely. He's just a body waiting for a signature. A man I didn't know walked up to me. He wore a suit that cost more than Tyson's monthly salary, but it looked like a costume on him. Reeking of expensive scotch and decay, he bent down, his face inches from mine, broken capillaries, clearly visible on his nose. "So this is the old guy holding up the deal," he said, blowing smoke into my face and poking my chest hard with a finger wearing a heavy gold ring. "Hey, old man, you still in there? Can you hear me?" My gaze remained fixed past him, staring at a water stain on the ceiling, letting a thin thread of drool slip from my lip. Disgusting. The man straightened up with a laugh, looking back at Tiffany. "You said he was compliant. He just looks gross." "He's completely harmless," Tiffany laughed, stepping over. "Watch." She stood in front of me as the room fell quiet. The sharks smelled blood. They wanted a show to see just how broken this old man was. Tiffany dipped her fingers into her wine glass and flicked red drops onto my face. "Wake up, Cyrus," she sang out. The party started. The guests laughed, a cruel, jarring sound. Encouraged, she took a sip from her glass and deliberately tilted it. A stream of dark red liquid poured onto the thigh of my suit, soaking through the fabric and staining the white shirt underneath. It looked like a gunshot wound. It looked like blood. "Oops," she giggled, pretending to cover her mouth. My hand slipped. "Look at him. He doesn't even care. He likes it. He's probably thirsty." She poured the rest of the glass directly over my head. Wine ran down my forehead into my eyes, stinging sharply and blurring my vision, dripping down my nose and chin onto the floor. I sat there soaked, covered in alcohol and humiliation, while 20 strangers mocked my stripped dignity. "Someone take a picture," the man in the snakeskin jacket shouted. "Send it to the nursing home. Tell them he's pre-marinated." Tyson stood in the corner watching. He wasn't laughing, but he didn't step in to stop it either. Taking a long pull from a bottle, he turned his head away, unable to watch his wife brutally humiliate his father. He was a coward, a spineless accomplice. I didn't wipe the wine from my eyes, nor did I blink. I let the liquid sting, letting it burn, because that burning pain was my fuel. I used the blurred moisture to hide the movement of my eyes as I scanned the room. I wasn't a vegetable. I was a camera, a recording device logging every face in that space. I remembered the man with the gold tooth. I knew him. He ran an illegal chop shop on the south side. I remembered the man in the expensive suit, a disbarred lawyer known for facilitating fraudulent deed transfers. I remembered the woman eyeing my grandmother's china cabinet in the corner, an antique fence. This wasn't a party. It was a gathering of low-level criminals, brought into our lives by my son. Every laugh, every insult, every drop of wine was deposited into the steel vault of my mind. They thought they were mocking a helpless old man, unaware they were providing rock-solid evidence for their own prosecution. I watched Tiffany refill her glass, glowing in her cruel power. She felt untouchable, convinced she had won, and that stripping away my humanity made it easier to sell me off, piece by piece. She didn't realize she was stripping away the very last traces of my mercy. I focused on Tyson, watching him accept the envelope of cash from the chop shop owner. $5,000 for my life's hard work. He stuffed it into his pocket, pale as a sheet. He knew it was wrong, knew it was evil, but he did it anyway. That was his crime. Cowardice. Sitting in a puddle of wine, I watched the clock on the mantel. It was nearly midnight, close to the deadline for the Viper Capital payment. The desperation in the room was reaching its peak. And that was when he would walk in. Reggie. I had timed my text perfectly, knowing he would be waiting outside, watching the house, waiting for the signal to enter. The stage was set. The villains were drunk and careless. The victim was appropriately bloodied and subdued. It was time for the hero to make an entrance. Not to save the day, but to tighten the trap. I took one last look at Tiffany, still laughing, pouring, and showing off. Enjoy the party, my dear. Tea, I thought. Drink up, because tomorrow's hangover is going to last the rest of your life. You wanted to play with real players, swim with sharks, and you're about to find out there are much bigger, hungrier things in the water. And he was sitting right in front of them, covered in wine, waiting for the opening bell. The front door didn't open from a knock or a doorbell. It swung inward with a heavy, deliberate slowness that commanded immediate silence before the man even crossed the threshold. The heavy bass from the speakers seemed to die in his presence, and the chatter of the vultures instantly ceased. Reggie King stepped into the foyer like a storm front rolling over a cornfield. He wasn't wearing the comfortable sweaters he usually wore for our Tuesday chess games. Tonight, he wore a tailored, charcoal gray three-piece suit that cost more than the car parked in the driveway, paired with a long wool overcoat that made his shoulders look as wide as a doorframe. His face was set in a stone-cold expression of total indifference. He looked every bit what he was. A man who could move millions with a phone call and bury a problem with a single signature. Sitting in my wine-soaked wheelchair, I watched the atmosphere shift from a chaotic flea market to a funeral parlor. The low-level criminals Tyson had invited recognized a top predator when they saw one. The man with the gold tooth grabbed his jacket and slipped out the back door without a word, while the antique fence suddenly found her phone intensely interesting. Reggie ignored them all, his gaze locking directly onto Tyson, who stood by the fireplace clutching a beer bottle like a lifeline. Reggie crossed the room, his heavy footsteps echoing rhythmically on the hardwood floor, stopping 3 feet from my son. He didn't look at me, nor at Tiffany. He stared at Tyson with the bored expression of a lion watching a limping gazelle. "I hear there's a distressed asset for sale here," Reggie said, his deep baritone resonating through my chest. "A residential property, double lot, available for immediate cash takeover." Tyson stammered, his eyes wide with fear. "Who are you? Did Viper send you?" "I'm the solution," Reggie said simply. "I represent a private equity firm looking to expand its portfolio in this district. We heard there was an eager seller here." "Are you eager to sell, Mr. Blackwood?" Tyson looked over at Tiffany. She had already pulled herself off the sofa, smoothing her dress in an attempt to regain some control. Stepping forward, her eyes burned with desperation. "We're extremely eager to sell," she said, her voice strained. "But we've received other offers. Plenty of people are interested in this place." Reggie didn't even blink. He didn't look at her. His gaze remained fixed on Tyson. "I don't deal with brokers. I don't deal with spouses. I only deal with the man whose name is on the title deed. Is that you?" "Technically." Tyson swallowed hard, struggling to get the words out. "Technically, it's my father's." He pointed toward me. "But I have power of attorney." Reggie finally glanced in my direction. His eyes swept over my wine-stained face and my slumped posture. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "That'll do," he said. With his left hand, he lifted the black leather briefcase he was carrying. Setting it on the coffee table, he used his forearm to sweep the empty beer bottles and half-eaten cheese tray aside. The shattered glass hitting the floor made Tyson jump. Reggie flicked open the latches with his thumbs. They popped open, with a sound like a pistol being cocked, and he lifted the lid. The room went dead silent. Inside, the briefcase were neatly stacked rows of $100 bills. $50,000. It was the exact amount they needed to pay off the loan sharks. It was the exact amount they needed to save their own skin. To them, it looked like redemption. To me, it looked like bait. I saw the light in Tyson's eyes die out, replaced by a dull, animalistic greed. He took a step forward, his hands reaching out involuntarily. Tiffany gasped softly, her hands flying to her mouth as her eyes reflected the green of the cash. They were mesmerized, intoxicated by the sight before them. They forgot to ask who Reggie actually was. They forgot to ask why a stranger would show up at midnight with a briefcase full of cash. They forgot caution. They forgot fear. They saw only an exit route. "Is that?" Tyson whispered, his voice dry. 50,000, Reggie said. Cash, non-sequential bills, off the books, no waiting period. Tonight I take the deed. Tonight you take the cash. The debt is settled, problem solved. I looked at Tiffany. She was trembling with excitement. She looked at the money, then back at me. I could see the gears turning in her mind. She was already figuring out how to spend it, already planning her next lie, her next scheme. She didn't care about the house. She didn't care about me. She only wanted the quick fix sitting right in front of her. "We accept," she said, stepping in front of Tyson. "We accept. Where do we sign?" Reggie pulled a single sheet of paper from the inner pocket of his coat. He set it on the table next to the money. It was a document covered in dense, fine print. Pulling out a heavy pen, he laid it across the page. "The owner signs," Reggie said, "right on the line at the bottom." "But he can't write," Tyson said, his eyes tearing away from the money for a fraction of a second. "He had a stroke. His hands don't work." Reggie stared at him. "Then use his thumb. A thumbprint is legally binding if the principal is incapacitated, as long as there are witnesses." "I'll witness it. You witness it too." Reggie reached into his pocket and pulled out a small red ink pad, tossing it onto the table. It slid across the wood, coming to a stop directly in front of Tyson. "Press it," Reggie ordered. "Do it now, or the briefcase closes, and I walk out that door. And I assure you, the next person walking through that door won't be bringing money. They'll be bringing a baseball bat." Tyson recoiled, the threats from the enforcers fresh in his mind. He looked at the cash, he looked at the ink pad, and he looked at me. I sat motionless, letting the saliva pool on my collar. I offered no resistance, made no sound. Tyson grabbed the ink pad. Rushing toward me, he used his foot to drag the coffee table closer so the document was within reach. He grabbed my hand, his palm cold and damp with sweat, trembling so hard his teeth clicked together. "Sorry, Dad," he muttered, under his breath, not daring to look me in the eye. "I have to do this. It's for us. It's for the family." He grabbed my thumb. This time he didn't twist it. He didn't need to be cruel, he just needed to be fast. He pressed my thumb into the red ink pad, wet and cold. He dragged my hand over the document. "Right there," Reggie said, pointing to the line. "Press hard, make it clear." Tyson pressed my thumb down heavily onto the paper. He leaned his weight into it, rolling my skin across the fibers to ensure a clean print. I felt the paper beneath my skin. I knew what it was. It wasn't a property sales deed. It was a confession. It was a statement relinquishing all rights and accepting full criminal responsibility for fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder. It was a document Reggie and I had drafted days ago. And Tyson, in his greed and panic, was far too blind to read a single word of it. He saw only the line. He saw only the money. He lifted my hand, leaving a bold red thumbprint on the page like a drop of blood. "There," Tyson gasped out. "Done." Reggie picked up the paper, blew softly on the ink to let it dry, and carefully folded it before sliding it into his pocket. "Yes," Reggie said, his voice dropping an octave. "Done." He snapped the briefcase shut and fastened the latches, but he didn't push it toward Tyson. His hand remained firm on the handle. Tyson reached out for it. "All right, hand it over." Reggie didn't move. He stood there like a dark tower of judgment, looking down at my son. The room suddenly felt very small and very cold. "Just one thing," Reggie said. "A minor technicality." "What technicality?" Tiffany snapped. "We signed. Give us the money." Reggie looked at me. It was the first time since entering the room that he looked directly into my eyes. He smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "The technicality is," Reggie said, "the owner has to be incapacitated." "And I don't think he is." Tyson frowned. "What are you talking about? He's a vegetable. Look at him." Reggie shook his head slowly. "No, I think he's just deeply disappointed." I slowly raised my head. I blinked, squeezing the wine out of my eyes, and wiped the drool from my chin with the sleeve of my tattered suit jacket. Sitting up straight, I threw my shoulders back, feeling the stiff joints in my spine pop into place. The transformation was instantaneous. The broken old man vanished. The business titan returned. I looked at Tyson. I looked at Tiffany. Their faces slackened in absolute shock. Tiffany dropped her wine glass, and it shattered into pieces on the floor, though no one looked down. They were staring straight at me. I cleared my throat, the sound roof like gravel sliding down a chute. "You really should have read the fine print, son," I said, my voice steady and commanding. That ink doesn't wash off easily where you're going." That single sheet of paper lying on the coffee table, wedged between empty beer bottles and a briefcase full of cash, was a masterpiece of legal maneuvering. To an untrained eye, or to eyes blinded by greed and panic, it looked like a standard quitclaim deed, a mundane administrative form used to transfer property ownership. In reality, I knew every syllable written on that page because Reggie and I had spent 3 sleepless nights drafting it. The heading was, "Not Property Transfer Agreement." It was written in a font size that required reading glasses. Glasses Tyson had always refused to wear out of sheer vanity. It read, "Voluntary renunciation of inheritance and acknowledgement of criminal liability." The first paragraph was a complete confession regarding the Christmas Eve poisoning attempt, detailing the exact dosage of beta blockers crushed into the sweet potato pie. The second paragraph outlined the scheme to defraud an elderly individual using forged loan documents from Viper Capital. The third paragraph was the decisive blow. It was a clause stating that the signiathy accepted full personal liability for all debts generated against the Blackwood family estate, effectively dumping his own bad debts back onto himself while waiving any future claim to my assets. It wasn't a sales contract. It was the death warrant of his financial and legal life. And there it was, Toddy sitting in plain sight under the tacky chandelier Tiffany had bought with my stolen money. All Tyson had to do was read it. If he had read just the first sentence, he would have known the game was rigged. If he had read the fine print, he would have known Reggie was not a savior, but an executioner. He hadn't read it. He had simply stared at the stacks of $100 bills in the briefcase, his pupils dilated until they swallowed his irises. He had seen salvation. He had seen a way out of the pit he dug for himself. He failed to see the trap snapping shut around his ankles. He failed to see that the paper was not a ticket to freedom. but a one-way pass to a federal penitentiary. Tyson grabbed the red ink pad, his movements awkward and uncoordinated. He looked like an addict desperate for a fix. He yanked the coffee table closer, its legs scraping harshly against the hardwood floor, a sound that made the few remaining party guests flinch. He didn't dare look at me. He couldn't bring himself to face the man he was betraying for the second time in a week. He grabbed my wrist. His hand was clammy and cold, slick with sweat, yet burning with feverish energy. He squeezed unnecessarily hard. That was not a son holding his father's hand. That was a butcher handling a piece of meat. He dragged my arm toward the table. I let it go limp, heavy as lead, wanting him to feel the weight of it, wanting him to feel the burden of what he was doing. He pressed my thumb firmly onto the red ink pad, using his other hand to force my skin into the sponge until ink seeped beneath my thumbnail. It felt wet and cold, like fresh blood. He lifted my hand, hovering it above the signature line, his breathing coming in short, ragged gasps. "Just one print," he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible. "Just one print, and it's over. We take the money, we pay off Viper, we start fresh." He was lying to himself. There was no fresh start, only the end. He aligned my thumb with the line designated for the principal. He failed to notice that the line was actually labeled defendant. Nor did he notice that the witness line Reggie had signed was labeled federal informant. He saw nothing but the finish line. He pressed my hand down, leaning his body weight into it, forcing my thumb flat against the paper. Just as he had seen in the movies, he rolled it slightly from left to right to get a clean impression. The paper rustled under the pressure. I could feel the texture of the table beneath the document, and I could feel the tremor in his hands, the vibrations of his fear traveling up his arm into mine. He paused there for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, making sure the mark was indelible. He was sealing his own fate with my hand. He was selling his soul, using my thumbprint as the receipt. He began to lift my hand from the paper, letting out a long, shuddering sigh of relief, the sound of a man who believed he had just survived a firing squad. "Got it," he whispered. "Perfect." He prepared to pull away, to toss my hand back onto the wheelchair armrest so he could reach for the money. My hand didn't drop, nor did it go limp, as he tried to pull back. My fingers curled, slowly, deliberately, they locked around his wrist. It wasn't a nervous twitch or a spasm. It was a vice grip. I applied the full force of a grip forged through 40 years of bending conduit and hauling compressors, clamping down on him. My calloused fingers dug into the soft muscle of his forearm, finding the pressure point over the nerve. Tyson froze. He looked down at his wrist, his brain unable to process what was happening. He gave a gentle tug, assuming it was a reflex. My grip tightened. I squeezed until I felt the bones of his arm grind together. A sharp gasp, a mix of pain and confusion, escaped lips. "What the?" he stammered. He raised his head and looked at my face. In that exact moment, true terror hit him. I opened my eyes, not a slow blink, but wide open, completely sharp. The dull, vacant stare of a stroke victim was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated fury that burned like a torch. I locked eyes with him. I watched his pupils contract sharply, watched the color drain from his face until nothing was left but an ashen, lifeless pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He was completely paralyzed by a primal fear that hijacked his nervous system. The room fell dead silent. Tiffany, who had been reaching for the briefcase, froze with her hands suspended in midair. Reggie stood like a statue, his expression cold and satisfied. I slowly raised my head off the back of the wheelchair, tilting my neck, left then right, the joints popping loudly in the quiet room like gunshots. Sitting up straight, I shed the slump of an invalid, discarding the weakness I had worn as a disguise. I pulled Tyson closer, yanking him down until his face was inches from mine. I could smell the stale beer on his breath and see the bloodshot veins in his eyes. He was trembling so hard, the wheelchair shook with him. I held him there, trapped in my grip, locked under my gaze. I looked down at the paper on the table, eyeing the red thumbprint that stood out like a scarlet letter, then looked back up at him. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I spoke in a low, gravelly voice that was terrifyingly calm. "Make sure it's clear, son," I said, my voice echoing through the room. "That ink doesn't wash off easily where you're going." Tyson let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a shriek. He tried to yank his arm back, but I held fast. I was the anchor, and he was a drowning man. "You thought I was asleep," I hissed, leaning in. "You thought I was done, but I was watching you. I was listening to every word. I heard you sell me to a chop shop. I heard you plan to dump me across the border. And I felt you press my thumb onto your own death warrant." "Dad," he whispered, his voice raspy. "Dad, please." "I'm not your father," I said, releasing his wrist with a sudden shove that sent him tumbling backward onto the coffee table. "I'm the landlord, and it's eviction time." I gripped the armrests of the wheelchair, my knuckles turning white. Not from strain, but from the immense effort required to keep from snapping my son's neck. The metal of the chair groaned under my hands, a sharp, metallic screech piercing the dead silence in the room. Planting both feet flat on the hardwood floor, I pressed down. The quadriceps Tyson assumed had withered from age, and stroke exploded with the force of a hydraulic press. I stood up. It wasn't a struggle. It wasn't a disabled man wobbling to his feet. It was a slow, deliberate restoration of height and power. I kept rising until I reached my full height of 6'3", towering over the room like a monolith. Looking down at the wheelchair that had served as my cell for the past week, I gave it a casual kick. The chair slid across the floor, spinning wildly until it slammed into the wall, with a deafening crash of steel and plastic. I reached up and grabbed the lapels of the moth-eaten old suit jacket Tiffany had forced onto me, soaked in cheap wine and the stench of their disrespect. I gripped the fabric in my fists and, with a swift, violent motion, tore it open. Buttons popped off, pinging against the floor and raining down onto the coffee table like hail. I shook the heavy, damp fabric off my shoulders, letting it drop to the floor like a pile of mud. Ripping at the stained dress shirt underneath, I tore the buttons right off the placket until it hung open. Beneath it, I wore a tactical vest over a fitted charcoal gray dress shirt Reggie had brought me in the ambulance. I adjusted my cuffs, straightened my collar, and ran a hand through my hair, sweeping the gray locks back. I rolled my shoulders back, feeling my spine pop into alignment. The transformation was absolute. The stooped, drooling stroke victim was gone, replaced by Cyrus Blackwood, the man who built skyscrapers out of mud and negotiated deals with men far more dangerous than these suburban parasites. The sound of Tiffany dropping her wine glass echoed like a gunshot. The crystal shattered, sending shards and red wine splashing over her pristine white heels. She didn't look down. She didn't flinch. Her eyes were glued to my face, her pupils bulging as if her brain couldn't process the image before her. Her mouth hung open, A silent scream caught in her throat. She stumbled back a step, her legs shaking so violently I thought she would collapse right there. Looking at Tyson, then at Reggie, and back at me, she tried to solve an equation that had no answer. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. All her arrogance, smug superiority, and cruelty melted away, leaving a pale, trembling shell. Tyson remained on the floor where I had shoved him, scrambling backward like a crab, digging his heels into the floor until his back hit the sofa. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving in short, sharp gasps that sounded like a stalling engine. He looked like a child who had just seen a monster crawl out from under the bed, only to realize the monster was his father. He tried to speak, but produced only a high-pitched wheeze, clutching at his collar as if he were suffocating. The party guests, the sharks, swindlers, and fences who had been laughing at me 5 minutes ago, were now statues of fear. They knew the taste of power. They recognized the scent of an apex predator, and right now it radiated off me in waves. The air in the room shifted. This was no longer a party, it was a cage. The man in the snakeskin jacket attempted to move toward the back door, his eyes darting around for an exit. Reggie simply cleared his throat, a sound like grinding stones, and stepped directly into the man's path, blocking the exit with his massive frame. He crossed his arms over his chest, his suit jacket straining against his muscles. "Nobody leaves," Reggie boomed, his voice rattling the windows. "This room is locked down." Panic began to ripple through the crowd. A woman standing near the kitchen dropped her purse, stolen silverware scattering across the tile floor. A man near the window spilled beer all over himself. They traded terrified glances, realizing they were trapped, realizing that the man they had just mocked could buy and sell their entire lives before breakfast. They had poured wine on a man who commanded an army. I saw the chop shop owner reach into his pocket, perhaps for a weapon, but he froze when he caught the cold, dead look in my eyes. He knew. He knew if he made a single move, he wouldn't be walking out of this house on his own 2 feet tonight. I took a step forward. The floorboards didn't squeak this time. They seemed to solidify under my weight. I walked toward the center of the room, stepping over the puddle of wine and shattered glass, my boots crunching on the fragments. I stopped right in the middle of the Persian rug. Sweeping my gaze across the room, I made eye contact with every single person. I looked at the fence. I looked at the disbarred lawyer. I looked at the guests who had laughed when the wine was flicked in my face. Every one of them looked away, unable to hold my gaze. I was draining the oxygen from the room. I was the gravity well, and they were being pulled under. I turned to Tyson and Tiffany huddled on the floor, a pathetic picture of greed and cowardice. Standing over them, my shadow cast a long, dark outline across their trembling bodies. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. When you possess real power, you don't scream. You just speak. "You thought the old lion lost his teeth," I said, my voice low like distant thunder rolling through the room. "You thought, because I moved slow and drove an old truck, I was weak. You thought because I loved you, I was blind. You mistook patience for weakness. You mistook silence for stupidity. You thought you could poison me. You thought you could sell me. You thought you could toss me in a basement and wait for me to die." I bent down, leaning close enough for them to see the fire in my eyes, close enough for them to feel the heat of my rage. "I am not weak," I hissed. "I was resting. I was watching. I was giving you enough rope to hang yourselves. And tonight, you kicked the stool away." I am not the victim here. I am the judge, I am the jury, and I am the executioner. Court is now in session. Turning my back on my trembling son and daughter-in-law, I walked toward the fireplace. Mounted flush into the stone above the mantel was an 85-inch television Tyson had bought 3 months ago. I had checked his credit card statements. I knew he had opened a card in my name and dropped $4,000 on it. It was the centerpiece of his vanity, a massive black mirror dominating the room. I picked up the remote control, sitting on the mantel, next to a half-empty bottle of champagne. The remote felt light in my hand, plastic and insignificant, but in that moment, it was an executioner's gavel. Turning back to face the room, I saw the guests frozen in place, watching me with expressions of horror mixed with morbid curiosity. They knew something was coming. They knew the physical confrontation was over, but the trial was just beginning. "You all came here for a show," I said, my voice booming in the quiet space. "You came to pick the bones of a dying man. You came to celebrate the liquidation of my life. Well, I'm a generous host. I wouldn't want you to leave empty-handed, without a little entertainment." I pointed the remote at the screen and hit the power button. The massive display flared to life, casting a harsh blue light over the room. It was connected to a laptop sitting on a side table, set up by Reggie the moment I dropped my disguise. The screen didn't show a football game or a movie. It displayed a logo, a gold lion on a black shield, the crest of Blackwood Security. Tyson raised his head from the floor, his eyes squinting against the bright glare. "What is that?" he whispered. "This," I said, "is the home video you never knew we were shooting." I pressed play. The image on the screen was crystal clear, high-definition footage captured by the camera hidden in the smoke detector in the kitchen. The timestamp in the corner read, December 24th, 6:40 p.m. A collective gasp echoed through the room. On the screen, larger than life, was Tiffany. She stood at the island, her face twisted in an expression of intense focus. The audio was flawless, amplified through the expensive surround sound speakers. The sound of ceramic grinding against ceramic filled the room. Scritch, 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 scritch. We watched Tiffany dump the blue powder from the mortar into the bowl of sweet potato pie. We watched Tyson standing in the background, frantically scrolling through his phone. "How long will it take?" Tyson's voice rang out crisp and clear from the speakers. "If the dose is high enough, less than an hour," Tiffany's voice replied. The party guests backed away. A woman near the rear covered her mouth with her hands. The disbarred lawyer shook his head, muttering a low curse. Criminals they might be, but there was a hierarchy to crime. Theft was one thing. Poisoning your own father at Christmas dinner was a level of depravity even the underworld found repulsive. I fast-forwarded. The screen flickered, shifting to the green grain of night vision footage. The basement. The timestamp read 2 days ago. The angle was from the corner of the room, capturing the entire damp concrete cell. Tyson was pacing. Tiffany stood over my motionless body on the mattress. "We drive him across the border tonight." Tiffany's voice hissed from the speakers. "Kidneys, liver, corneas. He's worth way more broken down than whole." The room fell dead silent, the oxygen seemingly sucked out of the space. This wasn't just murder. This was butchery, the commodification of human life. I looked at Tiffany. She stared at the screen, pale, her eyes wide and unblinking. She looked as though she were reading her own autopsy report, watching her true, monstrous self projected in 4K resolution. I fast-forwarded again. The office. Tyson sat at the paper-strewn desk, a pen in his trembling hand. "Just one signature," he muttered on screen. "Just one signature and Viper leaves me alone." We watched him trace my signature onto the loan documents. We watched him practice it over and over. We watched him commit felony forgery and fraud with the desperate, sweaty mania of an addict. I hit pause. The image of Tyson, forging my name, froze on the screen, a monument to his betrayal. I turned to face them. Tyson had his face buried in his hands, weeping silently. Tiffany rocked back and forth, muttering, "No, no, no," under her breath. "You thought you were clever," I said. "You thought you were invisible. But I was watching you the whole time. Every moment, every lie, every crime, all of it is right here. Terabytes of evidence, enough to put you away for 3 lifetimes. But that's not even the best part," I continued. I pressed a button on the remote. The video of the forged signature shrank, minimizing into the top left corner of the screen. The rest of the display was suddenly filled with a completely different interface. A social media platform, a live stream dashboard. In the center of the dashboard was everything happening in this room, in real time. Captured by the camera, hidden in the alarm system's motion sensor in the corner. And on the right side of the screen was a waterfall of text. Scrolling so fast, it was a blur. Comments, reactions, emojis. I pointed to the counter in the top right corner, the numbers climbing rapidly. 48,000, 49,000, 50,000. "Say hello to the world, kids," I said, my voice cold as ice. "You're live." Tiffany looked up at the screen, her eyes taking in the scrolling comments. "Monsters, lock her up. I hope they rot. Call the FBI. She tried to eliminate her own father-in-law. Disgusting." The blood drained completely from her face, leaving her looking like a corpse. She struggled to her feet, clutching her hair in her hands. "Turn it off!" she screamed. "Turn it off! You can't do this. My friends, my reputation." "Your reputation," I laughed. "Your reputation is gone, Tiffany. It's ashes. 50,000 people just watched you plan to sell my kidneys. 50,000 people just watched you lace my pie. Your boss is watching. Your neighbors are watching. Your mother is probably watching. You wanted to be a socialite. You wanted to be famous. Well, congratulations. You're the most famous woman in America right now. And everyone knows exactly what you are." Tyson looked up at the screen, taking in the viewer count and the overwhelming tide of hatred in the comments. He realized the life he knew was over. He would never work in finance again. He would never show his face at a country club. He was a pariah, a global outcast. "You ruined us," he whispered. "You ruined everything." "I didn't ruin you," I said, stepping closer to the camera so my face filled the frame. "I just turned the lights on. You ruined yourselves. I just made sure there was an audience when you crumbled." Looking directly into the lens, I addressed the 50,000 strangers judging my family. "This is what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you," I said. "This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness." I turned back to Tyson and Tiffany, huddled on the floor, weeping, crushed under the weight of millions of digital eyes. "The authorities are already on their way," I said. "But honestly, prison is going to feel like a vacation compared to what's waiting for you outside. The internet doesn't forget, and neither do I." On the massive screen, the live stream continued to scroll, with a waterfall of judgment. But I had already turned my back. The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict. But I still had a financial sentence to hand down. Reggie stepped forward, handing me a thick black binder. It was heavy, not just with paper, but with the weight of my son's stupidity. I tossed it onto the coffee table, the sharp thwack of plastic hitting wood making Tyson flinch. He raised his head, eyes red and swollen. "Open it," I commanded, my voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. Tyson reached out a trembling hand and flipped open the cover. The first page was an organizational chart. At the top was Blackwood Holdings. Branching down were various LLCs, property management firms, and investment vehicles. And at the very bottom, hidden under the Distressed Assets division, was a logo he knew all too well, a green snake coiled around a $sign. Viper Capital. Tyson stared at the page, his brow furrowed as he blinked to clear away tears and confusion. He looked at the logo, then up at me. "I don't understand," he whispered. "Why do you have internal Viper documents? Did you buy them out? Did you buy my debt?" I let out a short, harsh chuckle, devoid of humor. "You really are blind, Tyson. I didn't buy them out. I didn't buy your debt. That debt was mine all along. I've owned it the entire time. Viper Capital is a subsidiary of Blackwood Holdings. I bought that firm 3 years ago to clean up local neighborhoods and monitor predatory lending practices." Imagine my surprise when my own son's name popped up on the delinquent list. Tyson's mouth dropped open. Tiffany stopped rocking, raising her head with a look of pure disbelief. "You own Viper," she rasped. "I own the paper," I said, looking down at them. "I own the collectors. Every time you missed a payment, every time you ducked a call, every time you forged my signature trying to mortgage my home, you were stealing from me. You were robbing your own father. To pay your own father. The worst part is, if you had just come to me for help, I probably would have waived the interest. I probably would have restructured the loan. But you didn't ask. You tried to end me." Tyson looked down at his hands, then at the forged document on the table. The truth hit him like a physical blow. He had planned a murder to pay off a debt owed to his intended victim. The sheer futility, the cosmic irony of it, was crushing him completely. "You tried to sell my kidney," I hissed, pointing to the frozen on the night vision footage. "You wanted to chop me up and ship me across the border for $50,000. And the man you were going to pay that 50 grand to was sitting right there in that wheelchair, listening to you. You wanted to eliminate me to pay me. How does that math work out, Tyson? Tell me, how does that make any sense?" He couldn't answer. He simply curled into a ball, hands over his ears, trying to block out my voice, trying to block out the truth. He realized he wasn't just a criminal. He was an idiot. A spectacular, epic failure of a man who had destroyed his soul for absolutely nothing. But I wasn't finished. I gestured to Reggie again, and he pulled a blue document from his briefcase. Official looking with a government seal. He laid it on the table next to the Viper Capital chart. "And then there's the matter of this house," I said, my voice dropping to conversational volume, which somehow made it even more terrifying. "You were so concerned about the equity. $2 million. You said you were already planning how to spend it, looking at condos in Buckhead, picking out drapes." Tiffany looked at the blue paper, her eyes wild with desperation, clinging to any straw. "Is that the deed?" she asked. "Can we still sell it? If we go to prison, can we use that money for lawyers?" I shook my head slowly, marveled by her persistence. "You still don't get it, do you? You can't sell this house. You could never sell it, because this house doesn't belong to me." "What do you mean?" Tyson asked, raising his head. It's in your name. I checked county records. You checked public records, I corrected. You didn't check trust filings. 5 years ago, after your mother passed, I transferred the deed of this property into an irrevocable charitable remainder trust. The beneficiary is St. Jude's Orphanage. The room fell silent once more. Even the live stream chat on the screen seemed to slow down as the audience digested this new twist. I retained a life estate, I explained. That means I have the right to live here until my heart stops beating. But the exact second I pass away, ownership transfers immediately and automatically to the orphanage. No probate court, no inheritance, no equity for you to steal. I leaned in close, my face inches from Tiffany's. So when you were grinding up those pills, when you were planning to push me down the stairs or ship me to Mexico, you weren't speeding up an inheritance. You were speeding up your own eviction. If I had passed away tonight, you would have been homeless tomorrow morning. The charity would have cleared you out before my body was even cold. You were trying to eliminate me just to make yourselves penniless. Tiffany stared at me, her brain trying to find a loophole, trying to find a way to win. But there was none. She was completely cornered. The house she coveted, the ultimate symbol of the status she craved, was a mirage. She was sitting in a home that belonged to orphans, nothing more than a squatter in a charitable ward. We have nothing, she whispered, a total epiphany washing over her. Her voice was hollow, stripped of all its sharpness. We have no money. We have no house. We have no jobs. We have nothing. You have debt, I reminded her. You owe me $300,000 in credit card fraud. You owe Viper Capital $50,000 plus penalties. And you owe the state a very long prison sentence. Tyson let out a low groan, a sound of pure, animalistic despair. He looked around the room at the luxurious furniture, the expensive electronics, the trappings of his stolen life. All of it dust, all of it borrowed. He had betrayed the only person in the world who had ever truly loved him, all for a prize that didn't even exist. He had traded his soul for fool's gold. I stood up straight, adjusting my cuffs. The final nail in the coffin was set. I had stripped them of their illusions, showing them that their greed was not only immoral, but utterly incompetent. They were no masterminds, just fools playing with matches in a powder keg. And now, the explosion had arrived. Tiffany collapsed. Not dramatic faint, but a total physical surrender. Her legs gave out and she slid to the floor with a dull thud, curling into a fetal position. Her expensive dress bunched at her waist, face buried in the Persian rug. She began to scream, a high, piercing sound like a kettle boiling over. She screamed for the life she lost, for the freedom she lost, for the reality of her future finally crushing her. She was going to prison. She was going to be a felon. She was going to be poor. And for a woman like Tiffany, being poor was a fate far worse than death. Tyson didn't scream. He just shook, sitting cross-legged on the floor, rocking back and forth, eyes wide and unseeing. He muttered gibberish under his breath. "Sorry, Dad. Sorry." It was the pie. The blue pills, the ink, doesn't wash off. He looked at his thumb, where the red ink from the pad was still bright and damning. He began to rub it frantically against his trousers, trying to erase the mark of his betrayal. Out! Damn spot! But it wouldn't wash off. It was stained into his skin, just as his crime was stained into his soul. Reggie stepped up beside me. "The authorities are 2 minutes out, Cyrus," he said quietly. "The perimeter is secured." I looked down at the ruins of my family. My broken, incoherent son, my screaming daughter-in-law, with her face in the rug. The live stream audience watching it all, greedily consuming the tragedy. It was a picture of complete destruction, a wasteland of the heart. I felt a wave of sadness. Not for them, but for the memories that used to live in this house. The Christmas mornings, the birthday parties, the quiet dinners with Beatrice. Everything was tainted now. This house had become a crime scene. "Open the door, Reggie," I said, turning away. "Let the officers in. My work here is done." I walked toward the kitchen, leaving them on the floor. I needed a glass of water. My throat was dry, and I needed to wash the taste of that sweet potato pie out of my mouth once and for all. As I stood at the sink filling a glass, I heard the sirens cut their wail as they pulled into the driveway. Blue lights flashed through the window, illuminating the kitchen in a harsh strobe. The party was over. Everything had come to an end. And outside, in the cool night air, I could finally breathe again. Standing by the kitchen sink, gripping the glass of cold water, the front door of the house gave way. It wasn't unlocked, it was breached. A battering ram hit the heavy oak door with a thunderous boom, shaking the foundation and sending a cloud of splinters and dust into the foyer. The noise was deafening, a chaotic symphony of police shouts and heavy boots stomping across the hardwood floor. Dozens of heavily armed tactical officers flooded into the living room, weapons drawn, flashlight beams slicing through the dimness like lightsabers. They moved with terrifying efficiency, barked commands overlapping into a wall of sound. "Police, get down. Hands where I can see them." Nobody move. The party guests, those arrogant sharks and bottom feeders, instantly hit the deck. They knew the drill. Scrambling like cockroaches under a sudden spotlight, they covered their heads and curled into balls. I watched calmly from the kitchen archway, taking a sip of water. It was cool and clean, washing away the lingering illusion of betrayal. Reggie stood near the fireplace, calmly raising his hands, palms open. He was the only one who didn't panic. He knew these officers. In fact, he had likely briefed the captain himself. Officers swarmed Tyson and Tiffany. There was no gentle treatment here. This wasn't a white-collar arrest for tax evasion. This was a bust for attempted murder and human trafficking. A tactical officer grabbed Tyson by the back of his shirt collar and yanked him off the floor, making him gasp as his legs scrambled uselessly for traction. Another officer twisted Tiffany's arms behind her back with practiced force, securing her. The sharp click of handcuffs locking into place was the sweetest sound I had heard in 40 years. It sounded like justice. It sounded like closure. The room became a whirlwind of blue uniforms and terrified screams. Amid the chaos, I stepped slowly into the living room. Officers parted for me, knowing who I was. I stood at the eye of the hurricane, watching the final destruction of my son's life. He looked at me, eyes wide with fear and confusion. Looking at the police and then back at me, he finally realized there was no way out. The live stream camera was still running, capturing every second of their downfall for the entire world to see. Then came the finger-pointing. It started with a whisper, a desperate plea from Tiffany, as the officer tightened the cuffs on her wrists. "It wasn't me," she sobbed, mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks, making her look like a frantic clown. "It was him. It was his idea. I'm the victim here. Officer, please listen to me. He made me do it. He was violent. He forced me to grind up those—" Tyson's head snapped toward her, his shock turning instantly into the cornered rage of a rabid animal. "You liar!" he screamed, thrashing in the officer's grip. You bought the medication. You looked up the dosage on your phone. I have the search history, Tiffany. It's right on your iPad. Officer, she made me do it. She said we had to eliminate him because of the debts. The trip to Mexico was her plan, too. She knew the buyer in Tijuana. Shut up, you coward! Tiffany shrieked, spitting toward him. You forged the signature. You stole his identity. I was just trying to save our home. I was trying to fix your mistakes. You're a failure, Tyson. You've always been a failure. That's why your father hates you. That's why he set us up, because you're weak. I am not weak, Tyson roared, tears streaming down his face, mixing with sweat. I did everything for you. I stole for you. I lied for you. I almost took out my own father for you. And now you turn on me? I watched them tear each other apart. In a twisted way, it was mesmerizing. Their love, marriage, and partnership were exposed for what they truly were, a parasitic contract. Once the host fought back, the parasites turned on each other, consuming their own to survive. Screaming over one another, their voices overlapped in a discordant choir of guilt. He put the powder in the pie. She poured the wine on him. He called the forger. She called the chop shop. They confessed to everything, doing the prosecutor's job for them, handing over convicting evidence on a silver platter. Officers didn't even need to interrogate them. They just let them speak, allowing body cams to catch every venomous word. It was the end of their dignity, stripping themselves bare before the world, showing everyone the rot living in their souls. The officer, controlling Tyson, began dragging him toward the door. Tyson's legs gave out, dragging across the floor. His expensive Italian loafers scraping against the wood. He looked back at me, his rage evaporating, replaced by an overwhelming despair over his sudden doom. Seeing me standing there unharmed and unmoved, the reality of his situation completely broke him. Dad! He wailed, the word hanging in the air, sounding small and pathetic. He lunged forward, breaking free from the officer's grip for a second. Falling to his knees, he slid across the floor until he stopped right at my boots. Unable to use his hands behind his back, he pressed his forehead against the toe of my boot, bowing before me. He pleaded, Dad, please tell them to stop. Tell them it's a mistake. I'm your son. I'm Tyson. You taught me how to fish. You taught me how to ride a bike. Don't let them take me. I'm scared, Dad. I'm so scared. I looked down at him, staring at the back of his head, noticing his hair thinning just like mine had at his age. I remembered holding him as a baby, promising to protect him from the world. I remembered the pride I felt at his college graduation and the day he got married, thinking he had found happiness. Then I remembered the blue powder in the mortar. I remembered the cold basement floor. I remembered his voice discussing the price of my kidneys. I felt a tear roll down my cheek, but my heart remained solid as iron. I didn't step back, nor did I kick him away. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out a handkerchief, a simple, white cotton square, neatly folded. I bent down, slowly. Tyson raised his head, a flicker of hope in his wet eyes, thinking I was reaching out to wipe away his tears. I passed right by his face, using the handkerchief to wipe the toe of my boot where his forehead had just rested. I wiped away the smear of sweat and grease he left behind, cleaning my shoe. Standing tall, I folded the handkerchief to show him the stained side, then dropped it onto the floor beside his knees. My son passed away 3 days ago, I said, my voice completely devoid of warmth. The exact moment he watched his wife put poison in my food and did nothing, he was gone. You are not my son. You are just a stranger who broke into my home. Tyson let out an inhuman sound, the sound of a soul shattering. Officers grabbed his arms and hauled him up, dragging him backward toward the door. He stopped fighting, staring at me with dead eyes, his spirit completely broken. Reggie stepped beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Cyrus," he said quietly. "They're gone." I watched them cross the shattered doorway, vanishing into the flashing lights of the patrol cars, listening as sirens blared once more, carrying away the wreckage of my family. I stood alone in the living room, surrounded by the ruins of a party and the quiet of an empty house. I was tired, old, but alive, and for the first time, in a very long time, I felt free. The trial was hardly a spectacle. It was a mere formality. With live stream footage, forged documents, and federal informant testimony, they had nowhere to hide. The expensive defense team, hired by selling off the last of Tiffany's jewelry, stood no chance against the mountain of evidence I had systematically gathered. I sat in the front row of the courtroom every single day, wanting them to look at me, wanting them to remember the face of the man they tried to eliminate. Not as a victim, but as the architect of their downfall. When the gavel finally hit, it sounded like a heavy vault door slamming shut. Tyson Blackwood and Tiffany Blackwood were found guilty on all counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, aggravated identity theft, and elder abuse. The judge, having watched the videos with deep disgust, sentenced them to 20 years in federal prison without parole. As they were led away in chains, they didn't look at me. They looked at the floor, staring at the cuffs on their wrists. No longer suburban socialites, they were now inmate numbers in a system that cared nothing for their ambitions or comfort. The house was seized by authorities. The cars repossessed, and remaining assets auctioned off to pay a small fraction of the restitution owed to me and the state. Everything they had built on a foundation of lies was ground to dust. Justice isn't always swift, but in this case, it was absolute. They wanted a life of ease at the cost of mine. Now, they have plenty of time in a 6x8 cell to slowly ponder the true cost of a slice of sweet potato pie. 6 months later, I stood on a quiet hill overlooking the Atlanta skyline. The grass was lush and trimmed, the air smelling of magnolias and fresh rain. Before me stood the modest granite headstone of my wife, Beatrice. For years I came here alone, carrying the weight of my secret success and the heavy burden of my son's failures. But today, I wasn't alone. Standing behind me in a respectful semicircle were 12 young men and women. Doctors, engineers, teachers, artists. They weren't my blood, sharing none of my DNA. They were the children of St. Jude's orphanage, the beneficiaries of the trust I established decades ago, the true heirs to the real estate empire I built in secret. I paid for their college tuition, mentored them, and watched them grow into the people Tyson refused to become. A young woman named Sarah stepped forward, now a pediatric surgeon. A woman who saves lives every day instead of taking them. She placed a hand on my arm. "We're all here with you, Mr. Blackwood," she said softly. "In every way that matters, you're our father." I looked at them, seeing respect, gratitude, and love in their eyes. It wasn't the transactional affection Tyson and Tiffany offered. It was earned, genuine. That was when I realized I hadn't lost a family. I had simply pruned away a dead branch so the rest of the tree could thrive. Beatrice would have loved them. She would have been proud, not of the money, but of the lives we built with it. People often ask if I regret what I did, asking if it hurt to send my own blood to prison. The answer is simple: no. Regret is for mistakes. What I did was a correction. I spent a lifetime believing blood was the strongest bond on earth, thinking that if I gave my son enough and loved him enough, he would become a good man. I was wrong. Blood is just biology. Loyalty is a choice, and integrity is a choice. When someone chooses to betray you, they forfeit their right to sit at your table, no matter what last name you share. I learned the hard way that you can't buy character, nor can you inherit dignity. Money is a wonderful tool, but a terrible master. It revealed the rot in my son, just as it revealed the potential in the orphan standing behind me. I turned and walked away from the grave, heading down the path with my head held high and my stride firm. Waiting for me at the curb wasn't a rusty Ford truck, but a gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom. The driver opened the door for me. I slid into the leather seat, leaving the dust of the past behind. I had my health, my true family, and my peace of mind. The world thought I was a victim, a frail old man ripe for the picking. They forgot that before you build skyscrapers, you have to lay deep foundations. And I had been digging for a long, long time. My name is Cyrus Blackwood, and I'm just getting started. This story teaches us a harsh but necessary truth. Biological connection is not a license for abuse. We often hold on to toxic family members out of obligation, assuming shared DNA excuses the inexcusable. But true loyalty is earned through respect, not inherited at birth. My son mistook my silence for stupidity and my generosity for weakness, proving that money doesn't change people. It simply unmasks them. In the end, the most important investment you can make isn't in real estate or stocks, but in your own self-worth. Never set yourself on fire to keep ungrateful people warm. If you enjoyed this story of justice, please like and subscribe for more content. Let me know in the comments below, would you have forgiven Tyson because he was family? Or would you have sent him away just like I did? I read every comment. See you at the next story.